Okay, you guys, what I'd like to do now is, having drawn in our traverse lines, I'd like to label them with bearing and distance. Before we dive into that, let's just take a look at one thing here. Let's list one of these lines. So I can say list, and then I'll just select this line here that goes from control point 83 back to control point 8 and right click. And one thing you should see here is that when we list a line, we get the x, y, and z coordinates of both endpoints of that line. And if you look here, you can see that the z coordinates, which represent elevation, are different. In fact, they differ by 12.3 feet. So if I were to label that line right now, I would get the slope distance between those 2 points. However, I don't want the slope distance, I want the horizontal distance. So what I'm going to recommend is that we set all those z coordinates of all those endpoints of those lines to 0 and then label it. The way we can do that is just to simply pick all of our traverse lines here. And then I'm going to right click and I'm going to choose properties. And you can see that over here, for the delta, or for the x, y, and z values, they all vary, obviously. But what I want to do is I want to click on my start z for each line, and I want it to be 0. So I'm going to type in 0 and hit enter. And then where it says end z, I'm also going to set that to be 0. Okay, and just to check to make sure that that worked, let's try something. I'm going to hit escape here, and I'll list that line again, that same line. We saw that it had 12.3 feet of elevation change from one endpoint to the other last time, and now, hopefully, we can see that the z values are 0 and the delta z, meaning the change in elevation from one endpoint to the other, is 0. So that line, if we label it now, will be the horizontal distance. So now I'd like to just go through how to label these lines with you. Let me close this here. Properties box. Get my tool space back. There we go. Let's go to our Annotate tab up here. Click on that, and then let's choose Add Labels. And because we're labeling lines, let's choose Line and Curve, and then add line and curve labels. Now here we're going to choose the label type, and what I'd like to choose is single segment, label style, and I'd like to choose bearing over distance. Now this gets a little convoluted, so we'll go slowly here. If I pick this down arrow here, I'm allowed to edit the current selection. I'd like to label these lines with the bearing shown to the nearest second and the distance shown to the nearest hundredth of a foot. So when you get this dialog box under the Layout tab, you have to click in the General Segment area here. And then you'll see this little 3-dot ellipsis button. Click on that. And then a single tap in this black area on the right-hand side. And then I actually should go back a step here. Notice that the bearing is being shown as the component name here. I should have mentioned that before. So general segment, ellipsis button, single tap in the black area, and here you can see the precision is set to 1/100th of a second, which is kind of silly. So let's change that to 1 second. Now here's the part most people forget. You have to hit this little arrow, okay, and then say OK. So we've now set the bearing the way we want it to be. Now we're going to change this component name to distance, and we're doing pretty much the same thing. General segment, ellipsis, single tap in the black box, and here the precision for our general segment length is set to the 1,000th of a foot. That also is a little bit too high of a degree of accuracy, so let's change that to the nearest 100th. Here's that part most people forget, this little blue arrow. Say OK. Say OK here, and then say add. Okay, so click add, and then if I click on a line, I can move this out of the way. If I click on a line, I should have a bearing and distance label that looks just the way I want. It's shown to the nearest second for bearing and to the nearest 100th of a foot. And then you're just going to go around and label all of these traverse lines. Pick a spot where the label will be easily read, that sort of thing. Okay, so label all your traverse lines. Great, I'll talk to you soon.